This morning, I just want to talk a little bit about why you would think about joining ARC. I know that Paul is going to open up some questions just now. I've grown up in church life, basically from the age of 5 years old, being part of the Rhema organization for many years, and still are a Rhema church. And what was so amazing about ARC is, when I went to ARC, I was introduced to ARC in 2016. When I went to a conference in Birmingham, and then last year went to the ARC conference in Birmingham, and I was absolutely, as an outsider, when I walked in, I was absolutely blown away. And the reason I was blown away is because I walked into an environment that was so non-threatening. Now, many of us know, because we're senior leaders and we're leaders in the church here, is that whenever you get into a room with pastors, with leaders, it's a threatening room. Anybody agree? Like, how big is your church? Who are you? I went to a conference once and somebody asked me, why am I sitting in this position? I'm like, because I was just asked to sit here. And, sometimes it gets like you get into a room and it feels like very threatening. And when I went to ARC, it was absolutely amazing because I walked into an environment where people were not concerned about what you've done, where you come from. They're more concerned about, are you winning? And are you moving forward? And I was absolutely blown away because if you know, many of us, we live in South Africa, we're living in a threatening environment. You can't stop at a robot and you feel threatened by the guys always asking you for something to eat or something from you. And so going to the ARC conference, going into that environment where people are actually saying, hey, we want to help you win. We want to see you progress. We want to see you succeed in what God has called you to do. And what was so beautiful is in that room, there were people from every form of kind of theology, every kind of background, and the diversity was amazing, but the diversity with unity was really beautiful. And I think that's exactly what we're trying to promote with ARC, is saying that we are all different. In this room we have people from different flows, different backgrounds, but the common thing is this, is that we all root for the name of Jesus, and we all want to see people saved, people coming to Christ, being discipled to become who God has called them to be, and we're all fishing in the same ocean. And what I love about ARC is that we are not competing against each other, but we actually can help each other complete each other in the mission that God has called us to do. And so it's really, there's two things that really stick out for me when it comes to ARC, which is really what ARC is about, is number one, it's relational. And it's about not doing life alone and not doing ministry alone. It being a leader in the church in any format, any kind of level that you're leading at, is that it can get really lonely. You can't go to your church and tell them what you're going through, because they'll look at you and they'll say, what's wrong with you? You're supposed to be leading me. And so what's so beautiful about ARC is that they're interested in the health and how well you're doing, and how they can assist us in overcoming and having relationships that when we go through those tough seasons, because we all go through those tough seasons, is that there are people that are there going to say, we're going to give you answers, we're going to support you, we're going to pray for you, we're going to keep rooting for you. I met a guy from Birmingham when I was there last year, and even in 2016, and he just happened to take my number, and randomly he would just text me and say, you know what, we're just praying for you. We just want you to know that you're on our mind, and we believe in God to do great things. We see what God is doing, but we believe God's got greater things for you and for your church. And this is the thing that we know, is that it's so beautiful to be in this room with so many different people. And I believe that what God is wanting us to do is to focus on building the kingdom. Jesus said, the kingdom of God is at hand. Jesus first spoke about the kingdom, then he spoke about the church. And, I think that sometimes we can get so caught up building our own church, and we lose picture of the fact that we are part of something bigger than our own church called the kingdom of God. And God is pouring resources into our churches, but he's also wanting to pour resources into building the kingdom, because I believe that this is what God is wanting to do. And so I really want to encourage us, for people that maybe you're here to find out more about ARC, it's really about relationship, that we don't do life alone, and we need to be connected to one another, because there is health in connection. In actual fact, when you look at the rise of David and you look at the success of David and the demise of David, it was all through connection. The men that he surrounded himself, his mighty men, he was connected to them. And as a result of that, they helped him get into the position and fulfill the call that God had on his life to be king of Israel. The moment he was disconnected, he fell into the trap of sin, where he fell into adultery with Bathsheba, all because of connection. And when we disconnected, it's so much more difficult. We become so much more vulnerable. We become such a bigger target for the enemy to do what he wants to do. Because if he can strike the shepherd, he can scatter the sheep. And I really believe that God doesn't want you and I to do ministry alone. In actual fact, Moses was a leader. And Moses needed Aaron to raise his hand. He needed men to raise his hands. You know, Aaron was a priest as well. So many times we tell our congregation, you know what, you need to be in community, you need to be connected. But the question is, are we connected as leaders to something that's lifting up our hands? And this is what ARC does, is it lifts up our hands to do what God has called us to do. Amen. And so I believe that we can join ARC. You can find out more about ARC. It's about relationships. It's about people. You've heard it over and over from Paul already about how the people are just open-handed to say, what can we do? How can we help for you to succeed in life? And I think that we need an environment where we are connected. And I think ARC is an amazing environment, no matter where you come from, no matter what your background or your theological perspective is. You know, it's an environment that God has placed, I think, in South Africa, brought into South Africa so that the church leaders can actually flourish. God is into ecosystems. He builds ecosystems, and the church is an ecosystem. And, you know, when we tap into God's ecosystem, things go well. You know, a study was done on trees. There's a thing called root touching, that when trees are planted in a field, a tree that's planted in isolation in a field is more prone to be getting infected and being impacted and get a disease from what's in the soil than trees that are planted together. And when trees are planted, different trees are planted together, when you have that root touching, what happens is then you're running out of life and you're running out of nutrients. The moment your roots touch, you draw life from the tree next door to you. In China, what they realized, and this is what's so beautiful about ARC, because in China, what they did was they planted a rice field and they used exactly the same grain, and they wanted to multiply the grain. And what they noticed is over a few periods, over a few seasons, that they weren't producing the kind of harvest that they were trying to produce. So they decided to uplift that grain, that field that had just one kind of grain, and they started to plant different kinds of grain in that field. And the crop increased, the yield of the crop increased by 89%. And the reason is because there was diversity. The other grains could fight off the disease and infection that was coming from the soil, and that caused them to start producing. And you know, we are diverse. We all come from different backgrounds, but we're rooting for the same name. We have the same purpose. We're in the same ocean fishing for fish, not trying to get transferal growth. We're trying to get the lost saved. And you know, when we plant it together, we can see God do something amazing. So it's really about connection. It's really about you and I having a place where we do church in the same community and we're rooting for each other. I shouldn't be worried about Pastor Felix or Pastor Ryan or Pastor Trevor Coleman, who's building great churches in the community. I should be concerned about what's happening at the mall on a Sunday morning and at the rugby field and at the sports stadiums, because that's who we're competing for. We're not competing for each other's churches. We're here to build the kingdom of God. And I believe that when we tap into the kingdom mindset, not the church mindset, we will see the church achieve so much more than what we've ever seen it achieve, because God is focused on building His kingdom. Amen. And then the next thing is that it really is about planting churches, as you've heard. And you know, I think this year, ARC is scheduled to plant, I think it's 7 new churches that are on the books to plant. And the truth in the reality is that I can't go and plant those churches on my own. But what I can do is I can partner with ARC and be a part of ARC in planting those churches. And so what's so beautiful about that is that when people get born again in that church and people come to Christ and people find salvation and discover their calling and discover their purpose, even though I wasn't there in person, I was there in spirit and I was there in contribution. And I've had a part to play in the growth of that church and the salvations that have happened within that church. And you know, the kingdom of God is really about contribution. In actual fact, when God made a statement about His Son, He said, "For God so loved the world, He gave." He didn't take from us, He gave to us. And I think that when we look at what we can do, and not everybody is in the same position to do what the other person can do, but we can all have a part to play in planting churches in our nation. And I think that's exactly the heart of ARC. And I pray that your heart would be open to that, to realize that it's a non-threatening environment and that ARC really wants the best for you, for your local church. Why? Because if the leader is healthy, everything else is healthy. When your marriage is healthy, your family is healthy. When your family is healthy, church is healthy. When things go wrong in your personal space, it impacts every other arena of your life. And that's our prayer. And I think that's the heart of ARC, is to say, guys, don't do ministry alone. Finish strong. Realize that we're here to hold each other's hands up so that we can champion the cause of Jesus Christ in South Africa, our nation.
So we have in South Africa, Obviously, we're part of ARC and connected to the ARC in the US, but we have a lead team here, and Donavan and Shelley Cassell, myself and my wife, Marinette, and Chris and Pindi Matabula, and Phil and Lucinda Dooley form the lead team in South Africa. And that's really because we're trying to encourage and create a culture where we can spur one another on. And that's the lead team in the future. I'm pretty sure it's going to continue to grow and expand. But we absolutely believe that you're here not by accident. Yes, you might have responded to an invitation, but we do believe, like you would say to your congregation on a Sunday, we don't think that you're here by accident, but God's got something inside of you that He wants you to contribute. And there'll be some lessons that you might have learned along the way in your journey so far that somebody else would really like to learn that lesson so they don't have to go through the same pain that you might have gone through. And absolutely together, we don't have all the answers, but together in this room, we're going to have a whole lot more answers than a few of us. And if we can share our resources, if we can share our ideas, if we can set up the next generation to go further and run faster and build bigger and better churches than what we can, then we're going to make a big difference. So that's what it is. So ARC has a component, a huge training component. Most of that training is online. So if you go onto our ARC website in South Africa, arcchurches.co.za, and somebody wants to launch, they can actually sign up to launch to train. And there's an on-site assessment process. So in assessing a couple to plant a church, we'd look primarily at their readiness. Are they ready? So we would hardly ever say to someone, no, you're not called to plant a church. But what we probably would say is, you're not ready. Because we want to make sure that we're setting up people to succeed in leading a church. Are they ready emotionally? Is their marriage at a place where they can do it? Are their personal finances at a place where they can do it? Do they have the right amount of ministry experience to really grow a church? I was actually talking to a guy last night. He didn't plant through ARC. He only heard about ARC a little bit later in his journey, and they planted last year in a small town just close to Volcom. I won't say which town, because you might know him. But he phoned me in a state, because he planted the church. He's like, freaking out, and he's holding his little baby, and I can hear the baby crying, and he's like, Paul, help me. Because, the truth is he doesn't know how to delegate, and he doesn't know how to build team. And so this church has grown rapidly, and his marriage is taking strain. He's struggling. And if he had just gone through our process, we would have helped him a whole lot of pain. So we're coming in the back end and giving him advice and doing this and hopefully helping him get through this difficult season. But we could have helped him avoid all of that pain and actually make sure that he succeeds. So we do a few things. We assess a person's marriage. We assess their personal finances. Because so often the way a couple leads their personal finances is probably going to how they handle the church's finances. And if their personal finances are in a mess, the church's finances are probably going to be in a mess as well. So we want to look at that and make sure that we're helping them in that environment. And then looking at their ministry experience. Have they been in a growing environment? Do a DISC profile test on them. If you're not maybe you're familiar with DISC, if you're not an I or a D, the truth is it's going to be really difficult for you to gather people. It's going to be really, really difficult for you to confront somebody and say, probably that's not a good idea, and shape culture. And if you can't say no, you probably can't lead. I think that's true. I think when I coaching with some of our leaders, I'm like, you need to say no, but don't say no like say no with a smile. No, that's not a good idea. No. Because sometimes what happens is like the no builds up, like you get frustrated, and then it's like, no, you climb all over the person, you destroy the person in the way that you say no. No, that's not going to work. No, we're not going to do it like that. No. And just the ability to say no to good ideas so that people can say yes to the right ideas. And that's such a critical thing. And if they haven't been in a growing environment, haven't learned some of those basic things, then rather learn those things before you launch. The other big things that we want to do is help people set up, build a proper launch team, because launching a church takes energy. We want to give them the right amount of ability so they can grow, they can launch big and break that gravitational pull that wants to pull people down to earth. So that they can actually be financially sustainable. That would be the goal from month one. And what does that look like? Looking at budgets, looking at things. And then what ARC would like to do, if it's necessary, is give an interest-free loan to the church that they would then pay back over a period of time, and that we can use that money to pay to the next church according to their budget. And so we did our first one last year, and they launched from scratch with they had a big launch team. They had 70 people in their launch team, and they had 400 people on their first Sunday. and that then drifted down to 200 adults, and they've been averaging just about above 200 adults, but they were financially viable from month one. Wow. That's awesome. That both husband and wife's salary were covered, that everything was sorted out, and they're doing well. They're growing, and it's amazing. This year, as you heard, we've got more than this, but we've got 7.5 really good church plants on the cards that I'm pretty convinced are going to do well. One of them is actually launching this coming Sunday, just in Wellington, just outside of Paarl. They actually, just the financial budget, they've got a 1.2 million rand budget. We haven't had to give them any money. They've had to raise that money. We've helped coaching them through that. And they're going to launch really, really well. A phenomenal facility. We've got another couple, CJ and Natalie Janssen. They're launching in April in Jeffreys Bay. He sent me a video or some stuff this morning. They had a meetup last night, and we're coaching them on how to gather people, how to build a launch team. And he's like, Paul, we had 13 people sign up to our launch team last night. He says, it works. Just helping him navigate that, and we're really excited about them. And then we've got 2 couples that are going to be launching in East London. One is in Beacon Bay, Mwezi and Yolanda, and I am so excited about them. A phenomenal couple. They already have 10 couples that are committed to them. But they come out of a church that wasn't really in a growing environment. And so part of the Art Network, we were able to connect them with Calvary in East London. This is a great church led by Dustin and his wife. And he's like, oh, great, let's bring this couple into our lead team meetings, into our staff meetings. They're in the services. They're seeing something larger. And they're getting coached. They're going to be planting down the road. And Dustin's going to be cheering them on. I think that's awesome. And we can do that. And then William and Noma, they're planting in Ndatsani, I think it is, I've got to pronounce the name, a big township just outside East London, and we're going to do really, really well as well. And then we've got 2 couples planting in KwaZulu-Natal, Bevan and Tamlin Russell. They're going to be planting on the north coast of Durban, also around about August. They're busy actually tomorrow night, they're having their first gathering to build a launch team, and very, very excited about them. Also, great experience, and they're going to do well. And another couple, Tom and Aileen, planting in Pietermaritzburg, also going to be launching in September. And they actually had met through relationships, met with a business guy that wants to build them a church, cash-free, debt-free. Here we go. They just feel like the businessman feels that God's called them to build a church. That's a great way to plant a church. And then one other couple going to be planting in Durban for later on this year as well. So that's exciting, but the truth is that we also need some money. So what we do, one of the ways that we can contribute, it's not written in stone anywhere, but we do encourage churches, if you could, consider about giving some money towards church planting. Yeah. Consider about giving 2% of your income towards changing our nation. Yeah. And we do think that the way that we assess couples, the way that we process and we train and we recruit and that we provide ongoing training, I think it's good soil. And I think that we can actually change South Africa. So I would encourage you to pray about that with your missions budget. What are you giving away? And maybe if you could help us fund these next church planters and get them off their feet. Is that good? Great. I'm just going to share a lesson that I've learned. Marinette and I went to Mongu in Western Zambia and started planting churches a number of years ago. And then we felt God call us back to South Africa to plant a church in Cape Town. We ended up replanting a small church that had about 50 people in it, and God's breathed on it. And I share this with you in 6.5 years, just to give you a little bit of context. And it's grown, and we run about, I think this last Sunday, we were about 2,300 people in church. We're having 5 services on a Sunday. It's a bit of a mission. But we're doing that, and then we planted some community churches, and we still lead the churches in Zambia. So we have 80 churches. I think it might be a little bit more than that. 80 churches in Zambia that we're leading. Most of them are village churches, but we have 4 of them that are in towns. And so how do we navigate that? What are some of the things that we've learned? And this is something that I've discovered, that I've learned in the last 2 years that we've been on a journey from, and I think it might be helpful to you. This is something that we stumble upon. If you are leading a large church, you probably figured this out already. But what we found, I'm by nature, maybe because I'm a millennial, postmodern or whatever, I'm like anti-title, anti-positional leadership. I've got like an allergic reaction to it. Like, and I'm so overly committed to the priesthood of all believers that I really believe that our role is to develop other people and build away from ourselves. So it's my default. I know it's an issue. I know you need to pray for me. God must help me with it. But it's one of those things inside of me. So we've always tried to build away from a top leader. Try and make sure that it's not about a position, it's not about a title, but yet at the same time in the Bible there's this thing called honor. And honor can be really healthy, but honor can also be really unhealthy. Agreed? Yeah. And certainly if you go north of our borders, honor becomes something that could be very unhealthy, very detrimental to the positional leader and stuff like that. So how do we navigate that? What does that look like? How do we make sure that this thing remains healthy as we grow? And I'm going to draw a little picture of, imagine this is what church is like, okay? So church is like a one big arrow, and we know what the vision is. The vision is to reach lost people, and that's what your church is like. And inside your church, you've got a whole lot of little arrows. You've got these little arrows inside your church, and they're all awesome. And that's people. It could be ministries. It could be the youth ministry. It could be different things. And these are little arrows. But some of the little arrows they're not pushing in the same. As a matter of fact, some of the little arrows are like pushing in the wrong direction. Some of the little arrows are like even outside. They're like on their own mission over here. And so what we want to do is we want to create momentum, right? Because we actually want to move forward. And the only way that this big arrow can move forward, one of our primary roles as leaders is to get all the little arrows to point in the direction of the big arrow. And if we just did that, if we got all the little ministries and everything else focused on what the main goal is, the main vision is, and that's one of the reasons why vision is so important, because it unifies. It says, hey guys, this is where we're going. And if we could just get all the little arrows pointing in the same direction, then, half the job's done. And that's where the ability to say no is really, no, that's not a good idea. No, we don't do it like that. Come. And so we do culture, we do vision, we have mission statements, we have, words for the year, all that type of thing, because we want to get this, we want to get all the little arrows pushing in the same direction. Make sense? Yeah. Okay. But what I found is like Marinette and I had a bit of a rude awakening. We went up to our main church in Mongu about 2 years ago and arrived there, and we've obviously got major relationships with our senior team, but there's a level underneath our senior team, also staff, because we've got some of the pastors and leaders there that I've never met in my life. I don't know their names. I'm never going to have a conversation with them. That's just the reality in a larger church, We live in Georgia, it's a small community, but everybody smiles at us because you just think everybody's in the church. Hi, hi, hi. I got work, I rock up, and there's somebody wearing a volunteer. I've never met them before. I look through the list of life group leaders. I'm like, if I met that person more, I would not know they're in our church. This is the truth. The larger it gets, the more that becomes a reality. And John Maxwell said this. One of the things he says that our ability to influence people is directly connected to the change that we have in somebody's pocket, the change we have in our pocket. So our relational equity that we have with someone. Make sense? So I gain relational equity. Positional leadership is probably the lowest form of that. So because I'm the pastor or the leader, they're going to listen to me, but because I'm a positional leader. That's not really the type of influence that's going to change them. They're not really going to listen to me. So how do I get more relational equity? What do I do to really get people to buy into the vision and to the direction and to make sure that they're listening and going where we're going? Well, I can know them, I can encourage them, I can be there for them, I can maybe hopefully preach well on a Sunday, maybe the whole environment is healthy. Okay, so I can maybe do that, but the sociologists tell us that really it's about 150 people. But you can really have influence with, that you can earn that real relational equity that you yourself, through your own efforts, can do. About 150 people. Well, that's a problem. That means all our churches should only be 150. But we're building things that are larger than that. So to get back, Marinette and I go up to Mongu and arrive there, and the church, there's some things that are just not done well. I mean, that's just not our values. It's just not done well. So I'm like freaking out inside. I'm like, no, with a smile. No. I'm like, no. So we call everybody into the room and get all levels of staff and leaders in the room and guys, and we're just like, this is not acceptable, this is not acceptable, this is not acceptable, this is not acceptable, baby. And this is just not acceptable. Great, but we did it in a nice way. We got major pushback from our second level of leadership. And I walked away, I'm like, why do we get so much pushback? Why are they not trusting us? Don't they know us? And I realized, I don't have relational equity with those people. Well, I can't. So then our senior leaders say, no, Paul, you need to visit Mongu more often. I can't visit Mongu more often. No, they need to see your face more. I can't be there more often. Realize, you know what? My senior leaders, and go, okay, let's gather together. And realize that they're not building a platform for me. So imagine like relational equity would be like a platform of influence in people's lives. So we brainstormed and we said that we came up with this. And this is something that we've introduced, and it's really transformed our church in Mongu, and it's transformed our church in George. And it's this, is that our senior leaders' responsibility is to make sure that they are getting me change in people's pockets. They have to speak well about me when I'm not there. They've got to do that. They've got to do that in conversations. They have to be intentional about it. So just like, not because I want more influence, but the truth is that if I don't have influence, the church is not going to move forward. Because at some point in time, I'm going to have to say, hey guys, we've got a building program coming on. We want you to give. And if the guy's like, who's Paul? Who's he? Why do I have to give to that? But if I've got major equity, if I've got this really big platform that's been built, then they're going to go, yeah, we trust Paul. They might not have never had a conversation with me, but they trust me. Why? Because my leaders, my senior leaders have built a platform for me. And I think that's one of the reasons why I want honor. I don't want honor, but I want influence. I want influence. So how do we do that? So our leaders now, what they're very intentional about it is, they're like conversations. Jish, I'm so grateful that Paul's our leader. You know, he phoned me last night. And he just encouraged me. Well, 2 years ago, I was with Paul in the bush, and he said this to me, and it changed my life. And they'll just randomly throw in stories like that, talking well about me behind my back, intentionally defending me, and all of a sudden, I've got a whole lot more influence with the entire church. And it's changed everything. And if they don't do that, if maybe somebody says something about Paul, maybe like, I don't know about Paul and money, and I see him, he's going to the US again, where's that money come from? And they're like, if the guy's like, yeah, he's traveling a lot, huh? Yeah, I also think he needs to come to Mongu more often. Yeah, I think his head's growing, I don't know. Or even if he's just quiet, he just rolls his eyes. What has he done? He's just undermined my influence. And if it's undermined my influence, guess what? He's undermined the church. Because then we can't move forward. And so he not only destroyed my influence, he's actually destroyed his own influence, and he's destroyed this thing that we're trying to build. And so this whole thing of integrity and building things. But here's the next thing. I actually want some of these arrows to become bigger. So there's a little guy over there. I want his arrow to become, he's got a little bit of influence. I actually want his voice, he's pushing in the right direction. I want him to have a louder voice. I want him to have more influence. So I'm going to be intentional about the way I honor people in the church and staff, because I want that oak's voice to be louder. He might not have the biggest area of responsibility in the church, but he carries our values. What he's doing as a person, he knows where we're going, and he's influencing this. I want him to have a bigger voice. So I can't expect him to build his own platform. If I intentionally build his platform, that's going to help. It's going to help. And so what we've done is we've created a culture in our church where we intentionally build each other's platforms. We're intentionally building each other's platforms. And we're encouraging each other, speaking well about each other every single opportunity that we get. Speaking well about our staff speaking well about each other, defending each other, protecting each other. Why? Because the more that these little arrows are stronger and pushing in the right direction, so we're getting more and more momentum. What does that look like for the church in South Africa? And I think this is, if I had to sum up ARC, I think this is one of the things that I love about ARC is, imagine God's mission on earth, God's mission in Southern Africa is this big arrow. We know what the goal is, to extend God's kingdom. Really. When all of us stand before God one day, I don't think God's going to be too impressed by the size of our church. I think he's going to be impressed if the amount of Christians, the percentage of Christians in our lifetime, did it increase or did it decrease? Does his kingdom advance or go back? Because we can build a great church, but the percentage of Christians in our community decreased. We haven't really won. Like when Marinette and I first got married, I used to walk ahead of her a lot because I was in a rush. And I'm walking ahead, I'm like, come on, come on, come on. And she's like, Paul, you're married now. I'm like, yeah. She says, you're not there until we're there. Huh? What do you mean I'm not there until we're there? It's the truth. So your church can't get there until we all get there. It's the kingdom. It's the kingdom. Even if I'm not succeeding, if we're not all succeeding, I'm not there. I'm not there because it's actually about the kingdom advancement. And so really what ARC is us all pushing in the same direction, helping each other get bigger arrows, and intentionally building each other's platforms. Let's talk well about each other. Let's celebrate each other's wins. Let's pat each other on the back when we do well. Let's phone each other up and encourage each other. See somebody post something on Facebook. Oh, there's 300 people saved. Donavan had 2,000 people at a pre-meeting on a Saturday morning. Delete, unfollow. Or, thank you, Jesus. That's amazing. You're an inspiration. Build each other's platforms. Intentionally talk well about each other. So let's say there's a couple coming to plant a church. We've got Bevan and Tamina. They're going to be planting in Durban North. We've got a number of other churches that are relating to ARC in the very area that we're going to be planting. And even in our coaching with ARC, we would tell them, honor is important. And when you go into Durban North, guess what? You're not the best church. You're just the newest church. Talk well about them, and they're going to talk well about you. And never grow your church at the expense of another church. Don't fall into the trap of having to break down another church on social media and be critical about this and that and there. Just celebrate them. Talk well about them. Defend them. Protect them. Let's intentionally build each other's platforms. Why? So that God's kingdom can advance. Because we all need more influence. We all need more credibility. But if we have the opposite culture, which sometimes permeates throughout South Africa, we're like competitive, then we're breaking down each other's platforms the whole time. Oh, I don't know if they really, and look at the way they do that, and that's not really God's pattern for church, and really. No, let's just build each other's platforms. Let's always speak well about each other. I learned something from Phil and Lucinda Dooley, and he says this, he says he never wants to hear a bad rumor, about a negative rumor about any other church in South Africa from his staff. Like if his staff come and tell him, oh, did you hear about so-and-so church? Then that's a serious problem. I don't want to hear bad rumors about churches. I only want to hear good things. I want to celebrate because I want to protect. I want to cover. I want to defend. I want to encourage. I want to build each other's platforms. Let's get behind each other and encourage each other. And if we can do that together, champion each other, not have to be the same as each other, but build each other. I'm absolutely convinced God will breathe on it. He'll bless it. And we'll see Southern Africa change because we desperately need it. We desperately need it. Make sense? So hopefully that's helpful to you and it'll give you a bit of context for what we're about. Any questions? That was great. You know all the answers. Yes, Cinti.
Obviously, it's ARC Southern Africa, and I know you guys are starting here in South Africa, but what would you say is the timeline to see a church planted in a country outside of South Africa?
Great. So we already have one of the couples that's actually busy in the process going through the training at the moment, planting into Namibia. We do have a number of churches that are connecting to ARC in South Africa already from Swaziland, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Namibia, Angola. They're connecting in, but we just got to make sure that when we get to the place of actually planting, what does that financial relationship look like? It'll be much easier if there isn't a loan, because how do they pay that back if it is in another context? But from a support and encouragement, I think our network is already at a place where we can absolutely champion each other in those various countries. We already have quite a few churches that are connecting and relating together, and eventually I think hopefully we'll have like almost hubs, almost like we are doing now in South Africa, where we have like in the Gauteng area, Durban, Eastern Cape, Cape Town, Southern Cape, getting together and actually doing meetups, etc., in those various countries. Good, great question. Everybody hungry? Is that what it is? Any other questions about the processes, about the leadership team, about financing? No? Yeah.
Just, around the world, of churches, does every church pay like that?
Great. Actually, surprisingly, yeah. And so how it works really is we would fund a church 50, well, it was normally rand for rand, so it's matching, so that church would have to raise the money 50% and we'd match that. And then we'd look at their model, their budgets, their approval processes, and then the way that they would pay that back is they would pay the 10% of their income, they would tithe back into ARC. And then once that is done, then they would go down to 2%. So the once that's paid back from their income regularly, it doesn't matter how long it really takes, it's actually not important, but we want them to get into the process of tithing into church planting, and so they're going to pay that back into missions, and then once that's paid back, then we're going to use that money forward to go forward.
So is that rand for a launch? What documents is building a 50 million church?
That's you're on your own. No. Yeah, so it's actually only for launch budgets, because that's really something that we can control. And I think that's our strength, is in helping people launch well. Once they're launching and they're growing, then hopefully some of the skills that they would have learned through the launching training process is the ability to work with funders, to attract money. How do you approach donors? How do you approach business people? How do you ask? Being comfortable with ask. Like even in the assessment process, what is a couple's relationship with money? Because if you don't have a healthy relationship with money, you're going to really struggle to ask someone for money. Yeah. And sometimes you think, oh, I can't ask. I was talking to one of the guys that's busy planting in KwaZulu-Natal, and he's like, oh, but Paul, I just struggle with asking. I said, yeah, but just remember, you're not asking for yourself. You're asking for the community that you're going to be planting a church in. So you're not asking people to support you. It's not about you. It's about the church that's going to change this community. And so that's what you're asking. Oh, that makes sense. I said, okay, well then go and ask that question. Yeah, I can do that. I'm not asking for me. No, you're not asking for you. You're asking for the community they're going to plant a church in. Cool, let's do that. And so just even coaching them with that. And then once they have those skills, and when it does come, I do think, when it does come then to building a church of 30 million or whatever, I think they're going to have learned the skills through that process. They're going to have to be faithful with that process. And it's going to be so much easier than when they get to build a big building. Because if we're just coming up and saying, hey, here's some money for a building, but they haven't been faithful and learned the skills, then that building is actually going to destroy them and actually not help them. Yeah, Adrian?
I just want to ask around the coaching. I think that the way I understand it, that in the States, that there's kind of pastors that will coach others within the same area or whatever. And I know that we're just beginning stages in South Africa, but is that a formalized kind of process, or is it more relationally, here's a guy who's a couple of steps ahead of me, and everything else?
Yeah. So what we want to do is we want like an opportunity like this for you guys to change numbers and encourage each other and support each other. It becomes formalized when people actually come through the process. So our online training at the moment, there's 3 sets of videos that they have to watch, as well as they have to do a 2-day intensive on-site training with us, and they have to approve budgets. And then once they go through that process, then we assign a coach to them, because it's a huge responsibility of the coach to invest. And so even now, with our 8 that are launching this year, or 7.5 that are launching this year, myself and Dino, the plant partner, we're actually collaborating together. So we reckon between the two of us, we can coach these 8 and give them the care that they need. And then hopefully next year, some of these guys will actually be ready to coach to the next lot. So we don't really want people to coach that haven't planted through the ARC process within the last 5 years. We want it to be current and relevant. So that they can, so that they can, it's not like 10-year-old, it's changed. No, actually be in the coal face and make sure that the input is relevant. And so part of our almost thing is make sure that we're developing coaches, but then also our coaches actually go through a training. There is training for coaches, so we actually are all coaching the same thing, and not making sure that we're destroying people in the process, certain principles that we want to coach. But absolutely from groups like this, let's learn from each other, let's encourage each other. That doesn't mean that we won't take phone calls, phone each other, let's ask lots of questions, but in terms of our commitment and follow-up, it's obviously a financial commitment and a time commitment from us, is, okay, we're going to be invested in the ones that have come through the process until such a time that our capacity increases.